A few weeks ago, me, a 23-year-old female, and a friend, 24-year-old female, planned to go to an event together since we only had free time after work, and we decided to get an Uber so we wouldn't take too long to arrive and could enjoy more. The first half of the ride was really normal. It seemed like a normal, polite dude. But as soon as we got to the highway, his attitude seemed to change, and he seemed a lot more irritated. Me and my friend didn't pay much attention, though, and just kind of kept chatting between us. Our attention was drawn when he started shouting with another driver. He turned to us and said he was going to pull over. I tried objecting, but he ignored and pulled over anyway. He reached out for the glove compartment and pulled out a gun. It's important to note that guns are illegal in my country. We were just watching this unfold with held breaths, and when the other guy drove away, we let out a sigh of relief. But then, we were still stuck in a car with a crazy dude with a gun. And after that, he went back to driving and apologized to us, saying that the guy was tailgating him. I let out and, "Oh, got it." And he kept talking. "That guy's lucky that you two girls are here, or else I would have followed him and shot him in the face. Sleazy idiot." I look over at my friend and she's in shock and paralyzed. I'm in shock too, but trying to keep my cool because the last thing I want is to get him annoyed at us. If he was willing to shoot that guy for tailgating, I didn't want to know what he would do to us if I said the wrong thing. "No, it's okay, I understand," I say, trying to appease him. "These guys need to be taught a lesson," he continued while I just agreed with my head. "I did that before, you know. You just trap the guy in an empty street, and when he leaves the car, bang." Did he just admit to murder? Was the only thing running through my mind. But I managed to keep calm and just agreed with him the rest of the way. He did deliver us in the right place with no more incidents, and I waited a few weeks to report this since he had my home address and wouldn't be hard to figure out who reported him. Nobody showed up at my home with a gun, thankfully, at least until now, and an Uber has answered my report saying that they started an investigation, and I hope this guy doesn't do this to anyone else.
This was last year. It was late November, and this was the first snowfall of the season. It wasn't supposed to be anything too much, just a couple inches of snow. I got home from work around 8, and by then the snow had already started. I heated up some leftover pizza and stayed downstairs for a couple hours. Around 10, I went upstairs to my bedroom, sitting at my desk with my laptop. Before I could even open up something to watch, I heard something right above me. It sounded like a thud in the ceiling. I thought it was likely the snow weighing down on the roof and was probably nothing to be concerned about. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't concerned at all, though. This was my first winter at this house, and it wasn't in the best shape, so part of me was a little worried about any possible leaks or other problems that could happen with the snow. I tried to not think about it too much and continued looking for something to watch, but then it happened again. A thud resonating through the ceiling. I looked up, and the thuds continued, sounding almost in a straight line across the ceiling. I was genuinely worried now. I got up and grabbed my winter jacket, then hurried out the front door and looked up at the roof. Unexpectedly, the side of the roof that my bedroom was under, there was no snow on it. It had all slid off and fell into a pile in front of the house. I looked at the other side of the roof, and the snow was still there. I then looked at my neighbors' homes, and all of them still had snow sitting on their roofs, like normal. The way the snow had fallen off just one side of my roof didn't seem natural, like something was either wrong with my roof, or something else had made this happen. Probably whatever those thuds were that I was hearing. With no more answers to find outside, and my whole body starting to shiver from the cold, I walked back to the front door. I opened it and hurried inside, stomping my boots on the doormat. When I looked up though, my heart almost stopped. There were puddles of water going across the hallway. I stayed still and looked around, seeing water going through the living room and even up the stairs next to me. It only took me a second to see a boot print in one of the puddles, and I immediately turned right back around and headed out the door. I stood by the road and called the police, shivering as I tried to tell them my situation. About 30 seconds into the call, I saw something move past one of the windows in my bedroom, and moments later, a figure stood behind the glass, looking down at me. They only stayed for a second, then backed away. I didn't see anything else the rest of the time that I waited for the police. As I was waiting though, I put together most of the pieces in my mind. Someone had made it up on the roof, making the snow fall as they walked across. There were several windows they could have gotten in from that I honestly had no idea if they were locked or not. When police arrived, they didn't find the intruder inside anymore, but they basically confirmed my theory. There were multiple trees going over top my house that anyone could easily climb, and with the windows being accessible, it made for an easy target. At least, the officers think that that's the reason they broke in, just because I was an easy target. Nothing was missing though, and the way the shoe prints went through the whole house felt eerily like them looking for me. What's crazy is that I must have gone outside to check on the roof at the exact time they got in through the window. If I was any later, I would have been face to face with them, or if I'd gone back inside sooner, they might have not left tracks through the house yet for me to immediately notice. It's been nearly an entire year since this, and so far, nothing else has happened. Maybe it was just a one-time attempt, but I don't think I'll ever feel safe with all the uncertainties of what happened that night.
I met a guy on Tinder. There was a good feeling from the start, and we quickly decided to see each other. He asked me to come and sleep at his place, which I accepted because we had mutual friends, and I told myself that he was definitely someone I could trust. I arrived at his house at 9 p.m. and I immediately saw that he was not as I had imagined. He looked dirty, his apartment resembled a squatter's nest, and there was a smell of stale tobacco in every room. When I came into his house, I saw a stack of books on autism and I asked him about it. I learned at that moment that he is autistic with Asperger's and has difficulty differentiating right from wrong. He told me that he knows how to analyze nonverbal language very well and that he can tell what a person is thinking just by their attitude. I don't know much about neurodivergence, but I immediately wondered what his inability to recognize right from wrong meant. He offered me a glass of alcohol, which I accepted, and as I followed him into the kitchen, I saw a weapon placed on the counter. I panicked a little when I saw this, and seeing my reaction, he explained that he was not loaded and that it belonged to his father. I never knew if it was a real weapon, but I started to feel uneasy at that point. On Tinder, he told me that he wrote quite a bit like me, so he showed me a poem that he wrote on his computer. It recounted the assault of a child in quite precise detail, and I freaked out but pretended to appreciate his talent because he was really starting to scare me. He then talked about his ex, and he told me that they had fun choking and drowning each other in the shower because they wanted to know what it felt like to have control over the other's life. It was too much at that point. I had brushed aside many red flags in just a few hours, but I just wanted to leave. The only problem was, I had to sleep at his house, so I had to find a plausible excuse to leave without him realizing I was fleeing the situation. I was afraid that he had bad intentions and would come after me if he understood that I was afraid and had figured out his little game. I discreetly sent a message to my father with the address so that he could pick me up immediately. I explained to the guy that ultimately I couldn't stay, but that I was really disappointed not to be able to stay longer. I played the hypocrite to perfection. At that moment, we were both in bed, and I was just looking at my phone, waiting for only one thing, to find out when my father was going to be there. and at one point he asked me if I was in a hurry to leave because he noticed that I was looking at my phone regularly. I was scared because I remembered him saying that he knew what a person was thinking just by their attitude, and I told myself that he was going to take action if I didn't hide my fear. I managed to make him believe, at least I had the impression, that everything was fine and that I was in absolutely no hurry to leave at all. He offered me a massage, which I tried to refuse, but not wanting him to understand my discomfort, especially since I was soon out of trouble, I accepted. I found myself in my underwear with him on top, and it was horrible. And just as he was about to touch my chest, my phone rang, and my father was in front of his house. I got dressed up quickly and barely said goodbye as I left the apartment. I sent him one last message explaining that I didn't want to follow up because his behavior really freaked me out, and then I blocked him. One of my friends matched with him on Tinder a few days later. He had offered for her to come and sleep at his place, and I warned my friend, who didn't follow up on this guy. So, I'm a 19-year-old male, and my family moved into a nice house some months ago, back in November 2021. We had planned moving for years and basically already secured the house for us when the pre-owners, who apparently went to school with my parents in the 90s, were still living in it. We got the house sometime around the summer of 2021, but had to wait a few months for them to actually pack all their stuff and move out entirely as their new house couldn't be finished in time because of COVID. I was pretty happy when we finally moved in, since my parents basically gave the entire basement to me, because it wasn't like we were going to store anything anyways. We moved from a 70 meters squared flat to an almost 200 meters squared. Don't know the exact numbers, but probably 3 times the size, but I'm just guessing. House with 3 floors and all of that. I was really impressed because we lived pretty poor for my country, in Germany, and up to this point, I had to share a room with my 6-year younger brother for as long as I can remember. And as you can probably guess, I had no way to fill all the space with my stuff. Basically just set up my PC and my desk in the corner of one room with my bed and a wardrobe in the other end of the room. This was the room the furthest from the emergency exit, as my family called it. Basically just an old wood shed embedded into the ground, which the pre-owner made accessible from the inside the house by removing a wall and putting new steel bars between the basement and the shed. It freaked me out the moment I first saw it. There were all sorts of bugs and spiders crawling in there, and it smells like no one has cleaned it in there since the house was built. A really, really heavy, dusty smell comes up every time you move a wood piece even by an inch. On the other side of the shed's door is our yard, directly accessible by a small fence. Usually because of my very impulsive dog, no one tries to go near the fence as he'll storm the window and bark at the slightest gush, like a bird pooping on my car and the poop making a splash or some random pedestrians walking by like 5 meters away. No idea how he hears these things. I usually just run after my dog to the window just to discover what it was afterwards. For the last few weeks, however, I've been woken up several times by a weird squeaky noise at night. Up until earlier today, I have no idea where this noise was coming from. Then my dad opened the emergency exit door from outside and I immediately felt uncomfortable. This was the noise I heard all the time. When I confronted my mother about it, as she could be the only one going through that door, my dad works night shift 25 minutes drive from home and my brother's away on school trips since this morning. She said that she would never go through that shed. She, quote, couldn't even climb in or out without breaking her legs. I went with that answer as I would probably hear the door connecting our basement with the rest of the house too if she were to go in or out through the door. I confronted my girlfriend who stayed at my place for the weekend, and I remember hearing the noise clearly, but at that point, I just assumed that one of my family members were sneaking out or something, so I kept quiet. She said she didn't hear anything. I told myself that I had probably just imagined or dreamt it, like those dreams that repeat every now and then. At this point, I'm feeling very uncomfortable and paranoid about the situation. When it got to evening today, I showered and got ready for bed, but wasn't really tired, so I stayed on my phone for a few hours up to around 1 a.m., just watching TikTok and doing Duolingo. Then I heard the noise again. Somehow my dog had not heard it, and my family has never heard it, and my girlfriend has never heard it either, and I'm just lying in bed not knowing what to do. But I decided not to be a coward, so I opened the WhatsApp chat with my girlfriend and start recording with the flash on in the low-quality WhatsApp video because I was panicking and thought that I'd be more likely to send it directly to her if I had to confront someone. I ended up with a 3-minute video of me slowly scanning every inch of my basement with the camera first, and I thought that they would 100% be able to spot me with a camera with a flash on, so I armed myself with a sort of makeshift weapon from a chain and an old lock. Now fast forward 2 incredibly long minutes. I look like an incredibly paranoid idiot and end up sending the video to my girlfriend by accident. I can't remove it because she is very insecure, and a deleted message in the middle of the night would certainly bring up more problems than just sending it. I'm sorry for the long post, I just had to put this somewhere. I don't know where else to turn to, as no one would believe me, and I don't think it's a mental problem, as I've been fairly mentally stable my whole life with no family history of mental illness. I just don't know where to turn with this, as it is really messing with me right now. I'm definitely going to call off work tomorrow and look further into this. I can't set up a camera, as my old phone's camera only works when unlocked, and the screen would definitely be visible in case of an actual intruder. I don't know how they would react in such a situation, but I sure am not going to find out. I've heard stories of people living in other people's houses without them knowing, and I'm pretty sure that's probably what I'm dealing with. But if I told this to anyone else, they would tell me that I'm just imagining things or that I'm going crazy. And I hope that maybe you guys can give me some advice on how to proceed.
I'm a 20-year-old female. For context, I started an OnlyFans account over the summer to support myself through school, and things were great until I posted my Amazon wish list. Amazon doesn't release your address to people who gift you items, but third-party sellers can, and that's where I went wrong. By the way, I'm not trying to promote it here. This is a very frightening story and I feel like it should be shared. In late July, I got a puppy. One night around 2 a.m., I took him outside to go to the bathroom. While he was doing his business, I had noticed a car parked outside my family home. I saw a figure in the car, and I could tell they were looking at me, but I couldn't make out their face because it was pitch black outside. Feeling a bit uneasy, I picked up my puppy to take him back inside, and when I started to move, the car parked in my driveway. I sprinted back inside and locked the door, but they never approached my house. The next morning, I went to check the mail. There was an envelope addressed to my OnlyFans name with $20 in it, but no note. I was currently still at home with my parents who had no idea about my OnlyFans account, so I didn't mention it to them. A week later, I moved back to my college town to get ready to start school. At this time, I had stopped posting for the time being until I could figure out how they got my address. I've watched enough crime shows to know there's a possibility I could be in danger. I live in a duplex with a gated parking lot for reference. One morning, I was planning on vlogging my trip to Target because I was planning on starting a YouTube channel in the near future since OnlyFans felt unsafe. When I got to my car, it had been ransacked and my vlogging camera was missing. I know it's my fault for leaving it in my car, but I was using it the night before, and since I live in a gated area, I didn't think I would be unsafe. It wasn't in plain sight either. I had hidden it in my glove box. I used that camera to film my content, and the SD card that was in there had all of my unreleased photos and videos. I know they stole it just for the SD card. Anyways, this is where the story gets weird. There are cameras outside in the parking lot, so we were able to watch this person break into my car and find the camera, and they didn't touch any of the 7 other cars on the lot. They knew which car was mine, which suggests that they had been watching me for a bit. After they got the camera, they walked around the duplex until stopping near my window. My bedroom faces an outside street, and my blinds are broken, so it's very easy to see in. I have a curtain, but it doesn't cover my window all the way. This person watched me sleep for an hour or so. I have no idea why they didn't try to break in, but thank God they didn't. I believe the police are trying to track them down, but I've broken my lease and moved to a new place, so hopefully that'll keep me safe.
It began the summer before I entered high school in 2018 with innocent messages on Facebook. I never understood why he continued to message me, and after a couple of days of him texting 6 to 7 times in a row without reply, he stated that he was 26, from my hometown but stationed elsewhere in the Army, and had plans to find a young wife to cherish. I made it clear that I was 14 and uninterested, and then blocked his account. The next day he made another account calling me baby girl and telling me that I was what he wanted in a wife. This wasn't the first time that I had dealt with an older man interested in me. Naively, I just muted the chat and moved on with my life. I stopped thinking about him, enjoyed my summer, and then started high school. Everything was going great until the packages started to arrive. First, a necklace with his name on it, and then one shaped like a heart. They had receipts and were expensive. I was terrified that he had found my address, so I showed my mom everything. My mom tried to return the gifts. I'm not sure why that was her reaction, but he refused. Showing my mom the messages was the first time I had actually read any of them. They were weird, and some were about eloping with me when I turned 16. My mom found out that he went to the high school with both of my older siblings. My sister recalled him as a weird anime nerd, and he was friendly towards my brother, also an anime nerd. I ended up blocking a few more accounts and tried to ignore what I thought wasn't that serious of a situation, and after this we never spoke of him again. One afternoon in November of my freshman year, I was in my gym class with friends when I received a call with no ID. My friends told me to pick up, thinking it was a telemarketer or spam that we could mess with. We all heard something along the lines of, "I'm waiting outside the gym for when you get done with class." We thought it was another friend pranking us and laughed and moved on. After class, I had this weird gut feeling and tried to leave through the visitors' doors, but the coach told me it wasn't permitted. I walked out and there he was. He grabbed me by the throat, jammed his mouth against mine, and told me he was disappointed I wasn't wearing the jewelry that he had got me, and then walked away. I sprinted to my theater teacher, the only teacher I trusted, and cried for the rest of the day until convincing my brother to pick me up. I blamed the tears on the recent passing of my grandpa. I kept receiving CDs, mixtapes. He wrote many songs about me, bracelets and cards until COVID began, but I never saw him in person again after that day. Now that I, a 23-year-old female, am back from Germany, I've had some time to think over the events of my trip, but it's hard to think positively considering what happened to me the last night in Stuttgart, and I'd like a place to talk about it. I'd spent about 2 weeks traveling in Germany for the Euros, and considering how many fellow Scotland fans were there for the games, I never felt completely alone despite being a solo traveler in a foreign country. I guess I became too naive in trusting the older groups of Scots who buy me drinks and chat with me all night about where they're from and who they knew. Just typical Scottish chats, and I let my guard down. That last night in Stuttgart happened like most other nights in Germany. I'd be by myself and would get noticed by a group of older men or women who'd inquire about who I was with. When they heard that I was alone, they'd remark at how brave I was as a good-looking lassie, being there all by myself. I'd then be integrated into the group, drink with them, celebrate with them, and that night, cry with them after Scotland's loss. Determined to enjoy my last night, I said goodbye to my new friends, donned a short white dress draped in my Scotland flag, and went out looking for a good place to drink and dance with strangers I'd never meet again. I met a few people that night, but it was while I was alone that I met him. "That bag's bigger than you are." I heard a jolly older man wandered over to me. It was true. I had my rucksack with me that night. "Where's your boyfriend to carry it for you?" "I'm not sure yet, still deciding if he's going to be German or Scottish." I quipped back with a smile. Most of my interactions would start this way, with a friendly comment leading to an offer to come drink with their group. And after offering to take me to a nearby Irish pub to drink with him and his family, I graciously accepted and we began walking. He was overly exaggerating how incredible he thought I was for doing this alone, bowing to me and excitedly telling passer-bys how brave I was. I would smile awkwardly and change the subject. I wish I could say alarm bells were ringing, but they weren't. And after all, he was just a wee Scottish grandpa, one of many that I'd met that night. He began prodding on me if I had somewhere to sleep that night, remarking how they had room in their hotel if need be. I wouldn't force myself on you or anything. And I froze. It was so unexpected. I truly looked at him for the first time since I had met him. He was a relatively short man, taller than me, with a larger build and wrinkles to match the white hair poking out from under his Scotland cap. He quickly explained how he knew that I'd be cautious about that sort of thing, being a smart girl, and that I could trust him. But again reiterated that he wouldn't force himself on me. I laughed nervously as all the beer I'd drunk earlier seemed to drain from my body and I began taking in my surroundings. Where did you say your family were again? Just an Irish pub up this hill. So like I was saying. I didn't really pay attention to him. We were still on the populated main street of Stuttgart, but the numbers were dwindling the further we went. My ears pinged an alert to my brain signaling that I had just missed something important, or horrifying, so I mustered up a smile and politely said, "What did you say, sorry?" "That I'm a vegetarian, because I killed my 44th man in a vegetable field." "Oh, I've deployed in loads of countries. The first 6 lives I took were in Ireland." And my blood ran cold. I am a descendant of Irish immigrants who fled to Scotland to escape the brutality of the Troubles in Ireland. Did this man kill my family? Killed 12 in Iraq. I could only listen to parts of his ramblings as I began desperately planning my escape, locking eyes with every person that walked past. There weren't many. We had almost reached the top of the main street now. "Why are you so tense all of a sudden?" The words brought me back to the conversation. "You know I can read you like a book. I'm doing all this for you, see? I want to protect you. And Molly, I can guarantee you right now, you don't realize how much danger you're in." I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder, spinning round to see a young German man smiling at me. "Scotland," he mentioned to my flag. "I love Scotland." "Is there anywhere to eat around here?" I blurted out, staring at him, praying that I'd turn around and the old man would be gone. Brief confusion crossed the German man's face before the old man began rapidly jumbling up the sentence "Sprechen Sie Deutsch" in an attempt to sound as if he was speaking German. "Essen," I whispered, and the young man pointed in the direction we had just walked from. "There's a McDonald's down there." I turned back to the old man, whose look I could only describe as emotionless, as if he was staring through me, like I was no longer there. I felt another cold shiver before smiling. "I'm gonna go grab something to eat, but I'll meet you at the Irish pub later." As if snapping back to his jolly self, the man quipped, "Now don't be like that. I'm off to a rave just now. I'm playing at it. You don't want to miss out." "I'll catch you later." I smiled, and the man's face again dropped into a blank stare before he turned and walked off. I think the German man called after me, but I didn't hear him. I kept my head down and walked wherever my feet wanted to take me. I couldn't think, only walk. I don't know how I got to the train station or how I got to the hostel. There were no Irish pubs in Stuttgart, or at least not in that direction. The dark web is a grim place, a pit where humanity's worst instincts thrive, and it's where I work. I'm what's known as a white hat, a kind of good guy hacker paid to tear down vile markets, map the trails that lead to the monsters hiding in the shadows, and shine a sort of light into that darkness. Most days, I sit in front of my screens, the glow of my monitors the only light in my small, cluttered apartment as my fingers fly over the keyboard, piercing layers of encrypted filth and exposing secrets no one else dares to look for. It's my job, and it's not for the faint of heart, but I'm goddamn good at it. I've seen horrors beyond imagination, things no one should ever witness, but the case that haunts me started on a day like any other. A routine sweep led to a marketplace buried deep in the web's underbelly. It advertised human lives as commodities, young and old, with glossy images and cold descriptions. I'd seen it before, but this one had a different aura, polished, professional, and insidiously quiet. A digital fortress, almost daring anyone to try to break in. I remember digging into its code and unraveling the layers of security, sort of like peeling an onion. It was very slow and grueling and frustrating work, and the site had a grotesque elegance to it, its defenses crafted by someone who knew what they were doing. But no system is impenetrable, and by the end of the third day I was in. The database was rather vast, with entries detailing victims, names, ages, photos, and chillingly precise descriptions of their usefulness. Each profile was a silent scream, a plea buried in ones and zeros, and I started extracting the data, piecing together patterns and names and connections, and as always, I logged everything meticulously, building a dossier that might help the authorities when I was done dismantling the site. Then I found her, a girl from the Philippines, and she couldn't have been more than 12. Her photo showed a child with wide, frightened eyes and a forced smile. Her profile was detailed in a way that made my stomach churn. And something about her entry stood out, though. An odd note in the metadata, a small breadcrumb someone had left behind. It was a payment log, and it didn't lead to a buyer. It led back to her family. I ran her name through every database I had access to, cross-referencing missing persons reports, social media posts, and news articles. And the trail was faint, but it was there. She disappeared months ago, her last known sighting in a small village. The local news barely mentioned it, and her parents never reported her missing. Instead, their lives had taken a very curious turn. I found pictures of them on Facebook, standing in front of a newly built house. Posts bragging about a blessing that had come their way. Expensive clothes, lavish parties, smiles plastered across their faces. It just didn't add up. Where does a poor family suddenly get that kind of money? The pieces clicked together, a grotesque puzzle I wish that I hadn't solved. They sold her. Their own flesh and blood, handed over to monsters for a better life. I stared at the screen, bile rising up in my throat ready to vomit, and it wasn't just the marketplace. It was the betrayal, the abandonment, the cold calculations that turned a child into currency. I've always kept my work professional, very detached, but this time I couldn't stop thinking about her. She wasn't just a name in a database anymore. She was a girl who had been discarded like trash, her life ripped apart by the people who were supposed to love her most. I dug deeper into her family. Bank records, private messages, anything I could find. Every transaction told a story, and the trail was very damning. The deposit that coincided with her disappearance, the gradual splurge on luxuries, they weren't just complicit, they were thriving off her suffering. The more I uncovered, the more I felt anger creeping in. My work had always been about dismantling systems, not judging individuals, but this felt very personal. Her image haunted me, that forced smile and the terror in her eyes. I just couldn't shake it no matter how hard I tried. I've been compiling evidence for weeks, building a case that would hold up under scrutiny, and the authorities would take it from there, and that's how it always worked. But with each passing day, the thought of her family living in comfort while she suffered gnawed at me. They'd bought their happiness with her life. It was just monstrous. One night, as I sifted through the last of the data, I made a decision. I wouldn't just hand over the evidence and walk away. I would make them feel the weight of what they'd done. They couldn't be allowed to forget her, to erase her like she was nothing. I crafted an email, Anonymous and untraceable, attaching photos of their daughter from the marketplace, blurred enough to protect her dignity, but unmistakable. I sent it to them with no words, just images. I wanted them to see her, to remember what they'd done. I'll never know if they opened it, but I imagined the guilt festering inside them like a rot. It wasn't justice, but it was something. The marketplace was gone within days, wiped clean from the dark web. My work there was done, and the authorities had the evidence they needed to start tracking that network. But her face has stayed with me, a ghost that I couldn't exorcise. I like to think that she's still alive somewhere, that the system I helped dismantle gave her a chance at freedom. But I know better. The dark web doesn't just let go of its victims easily. Still, I keep working, tearing down one monster at a time, because if I don't, who will? So, I was heading back to my hotel from a friend's house at about 3 a.m. the other night. My friend lives deep in Brooklyn, and my hotel was in Manhattan. If you know the city, you know that's about a 30 to 45-minute train ride, give or take. The train finally arrived, and I was happy to be headed home. I was exhausted, and it was late. My trip had been going unexpectedly well until that point, and so I had faith that I'd be able to get home with no worries, especially since the trains and streets were basically empty at this hour. The train was brand new and had just been cleaned, something I've never seen before. It even smelled like a new car and still had fresh mop water on the floor. There were only about 3 other people on the train, all minding their own business, and so far so good. About 2 stops into the train ride, a man who looked like he was in his late 20s stumbled into our train car mid-ride through the connecting doors. He had a Nike ski mask, a shiesty mask, if you know, you know, which usually isn't a good sign on a nice 70-degree night in general, but I'm not one to judge by appearance, I guess. Plus, I know the shiesty mask is sort of a trend nowadays, so I didn't think too much of it at first. He sort of hobbled in, clutching his stomach, almost like he was concealing something or hiding a wound. His eyes were bloodshot red, and at first I thought it was because he was high or something, and he immediately hobbled into the nearest corner and sort of sulked there until the next stop. Then he ran out of the closet door and erupted into the most painful crying I've ever heard. He was just screaming, moaning, and crying while stumble running alongside the stopped train on the platform, still clutching his stomach and screaming things like, "Why?" and gasping through his tears. Keep in mind that I'm sitting in the middle of the train facing away from the side that he got off of, so I'm kind of breaking my neck behind me to watch what's going on. He then ran back inside the same car through the door on the opposite side. He was on my right before, and now he's on my left. And there was no one in between me and him now, since everyone else was closer to the right side. He did the sulking while facing into the corner on the other side of the car now, but this time he kept screaming, crying, and yelling things like "why" again, but he was crying so hysterically that it was hard to make out a lot of what he was saying. From the certain words that I gathered, I'm almost positive that a very close friend of his had just gotten killed or something. It's the only thing that could explain why he was acting and the things that he was saying. Plus, he was suited up like he just came back from a street mission gone bad or something. At this point, everyone on the train was frantically flicking their eyes over to him every few seconds. You could tell that they were panicked, but not trying to cause a scene or rile him up more. I was getting a little sussed out myself, but I had seen and heard about worse on the subway, and if someone he knew had really just died, then I honestly felt horrible for the guy before anything else. But then the entire situation escalated to a point that I had only seen in movies or crime shows until now. The man stayed in this corner, crying, screaming, and muttering things to himself for another 3 minutes or so, all while still clutching his stomach as if he was concealing something. I had definitely seen a black object in his hands by this point, and I couldn't tell if it was big enough to be a gun or not. After I saw this, I tried not to take my eyes off of him for too long at a time since I was the closest person to him, but I also didn't want to stare. And by this point, he was starting to say concerning things like, "Someone's got to pay for this." and then he would just repeat it louder and louder, and then he burst into a dialogue that made my heart drop. Keep in mind, he's still facing the corner, hunched over, clutching his item. "Oh, you sitting on this train right now, y'all gonna feel me tonight, you hear me? Y'all gonna feel me tonight, and y'all gonna hate it too. Oh my God, y'all gonna hate this, y'all gonna hate me." And he kept getting louder and louder as he was saying this, to the point where he was basically screaming by the last point. I don't know what he said after that, because as soon as that train stopped next, I bolted. He was screaming stuff at me as I got off too, but I couldn't hear it, and I definitely wasn't trying to turn back. I ran back up the nearest street exit, chain smoked a couple of cigarettes, and waited 20 minutes for the next train to come. I've seen enough in my life to know that this wasn't a situation I was willing to gamble with at all. I pray the last 3 people in that train got home safe and nothing happened, and I briefly searched Twitter and the news the next day for any possible info I could find and didn't see anything. But who even knows what's worth a headline to them down there anymore?
Last year, I was invited to a New Year's Eve party at my friend Alex's house, who is also my coworker. I've worked at the company for roughly 5 years, and Alex has been there a little bit longer than that, so I know most of the people around the office, but Alex is probably my best friend at work, so I was looking forward to the party. He lives not too far away from me in a neighborhood that I would describe as pretty typical. It's a house that has a living room, dining room, kitchen, and bathroom on the main floor. There's also a basement and upstairs as well. The party was at 7 o'clock at night, and it went all the way until midnight. When I got there, there was already some other people at Alex's house. Almost 10 people from work showed up, and several other friends that Alex had were there, but I didn't know them. I remember that at one point, maybe around 9 o'clock at night, most of the people were in the dining room playing a game. However, a few of us were in the living room, including me, because I wasn't playing the game that round. There was then a knock at the front door, which happened to be right behind me. Most people didn't hear it because there was some music playing and the TV was on. I turned around and opened it up and saw a woman standing there who I did not know. She said that she was there for the party, so I let her in, assuming she was one of Alex's friends. I introduced myself to her briefly, and I remembered that after she said hi, she walked past me and went towards the kitchen. After that, I just went back to watching TV in the living room with my coworkers. Over the next few hours, I played a board game with others in the dining room. When it approached midnight, everybody gathered in the living room for the countdown. Then, after it became midnight and the new year, people started to leave. It was getting late after all, but luckily we didn't have work the next day for the New Year's holiday. I remember that I went back into the dining room though and played another board game with some people. During this entire time, I never saw the woman again. I didn't realize it at the time though. I had just completely forgot about her. So by 1 a.m. everyone had left and I was about to go home as well. It was Alex, another coworker, and me that were there. And after the other coworker left, I stayed back to help Alex clean. I wasn't planning on it, but I saw the place was kind of a mess and I wasn't that tired, so I figured I'd help out. So I remember that I was in the living room and Alex was in the dining room when suddenly we heard this noise. It was coming from the back side of the house, probably near the kitchen, closer to Alex. When I heard the noise, I looked over at him, and he was far away from what it could have been. The noises continued though. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but I saw Alex quickly move into the living room and he had a panicked look on his face. He whispered to me that somebody was climbing through his window. He scrambled past me to the coat closet by the front door. Alex then took out an old baseball bat that he had in there. I heard whoever had entered his house was in the kitchen now, but we could not see them from where we were. It was completely around the corner. There was a doorway that led right to it, but the door was closed. I was very confused and had no idea why somebody was breaking into Alex's house. But Alex started to walk over towards the guy. He stood on the other side of the door. We hadn't heard any more movements from the guy since he had entered the house. Before Alex opened up the door to the kitchen though, he called out to the guy. Alex yelled that he had a weapon and the guy better leave now or else. When he said that, there was silence for a moment. Then a man's voice yelled from the other side that he also had a weapon. Alex and I didn't know what this man was referring to, if he had a gun or what, but we didn't want to take a chance. Instead, Alex and I just took off running upstairs. We both went into his bedroom and locked the door behind us and called the police. While we waited there, we couldn't really hear anything from downstairs. Alex still had the bat though in case the guy went upstairs. We quietly talked back and forth trying to figure out what was going on. After probably like 10 minutes, we were able to hear that the police arrived. When we went back downstairs, the man was gone. The house was empty, but the back window was open. Several items were stolen though. I stuck around to answer questions from the police with Alex. When they asked if anything strange had happened, that's when I remembered the woman. I described her to Alex, asking who she was, and Alex said that he had no idea. He said he didn't know anybody matching that description. It would have been easy for her though because it was pretty busy at the house. I think that maybe she was working with whoever broke in. Perhaps she opened the window for the guy or something. It's really strange, and I don't know exactly what happened there.
This happened last July, 2023, but a hilariously unfortunate Instagram notification reminded me of this unusual incident. My birthday was yesterday, and I, a 26-year-old male, got a Celebrate the Year notification that an algorithm paired with a picture of my black guy from when I first posted about what happened. And while this is far from the creepiest encounter on this subreddit, it's certainly a very bizarre and dangerous one. For context, I was a struggling homeless DoorDash delivery driver in New York City at the time of this incident. I say driver in quotes because back then, I didn't have a car or know how to ride a bike. I made deliveries either by taking the subway trains or limiting my delivery radius to a mile or less. I tried to stay in hostels whether I could afford them, but one unlucky night last July, I was out making deliveries at 4 a.m. since I had nowhere to go. Maneuvering on foot with food at this time made me an easy target, so I decided to stay near the highly populated and brightly lit Times Square area. I received an order from the Taco Bell in Times Square and accepted it since it paid well, and the destination was less than a mile away. As I turned the first corner, I felt something was off. I noticed 2 men walking closely behind me, and given the bright lights and tourists surrounding me, I initially dismissed the uneasy gut feeling that I was being stalked. And then they started walking faster and closer. I started changing my movement patterns, and they copied my exact movements. At this point, I realized that they were probably after the food that I was carrying, and I eventually yelled out loud, "Back off!" And they kept following closely behind. I started walking faster, and the men didn't stop, and they started increasing their speed. "Back off!" I yelled more aggressively, and they continued to follow closer. Tourists and bright lights still surrounded me, even at this point. As I approached the intersection into the following neighborhood, I continued shouting at these stalkers, and one of them yelled, "Shut up!" while the other punched me right in my right eye. Luckily, this caught the attention of the police who were right at the intersection where I was hit. Unfortunately, this was also the moment that I lost faith in the NYPD. The men that attacked me fled at that moment, and 2 cops started chasing them. However, the bumbling morons lost sight of the attackers before even a minute passed. I stayed at the scene for about a half hour or so with about 6 officers, with a couple of them interviewing the many witnesses around. I remember feeling a sense of validation for what I just went through when one of the witnesses came up to me and said, "Dude, that's messed up, man. I hope they get him." The officers eventually had me ride in one of the patrol cars to see if I could identify the attackers in the surrounding area. And my memory of them was hazy due to all the chaos, but I remember the clothes they wore. And we eventually passed by some other officers cuffing the attackers, who I was able to identify from their clothing and from seeing their faces again. I was advised to go to the hospital, which I initially declined due to my current financial situation. However, I eventually decided to go since I had no idea how severe my injuries were. Ultimately, I only had a black eye that healed after a few days, thankfully. The DoorDash order was canceled despite the customer making no attempts to contact me, and this meant I got full pay and could keep the Taco Bell cravings box for myself. And I'm not going to lie, It was nice to have a place to rest for a bit and enjoy a free meal, despite it being cold by that point. And after examination, I was permitted to rest for a few hours, when I was rudely awakened and told to leave in 10 minutes before security was called. My takeaway from this incident is that even in brightly lit areas with multiple eyewitnesses, it's always best to stay aware of your surroundings. Food delivery at night is no joke. Believe me, I have a laundry list of other sketchy encounters I could share here. But this was the only time that I was attacked in front of so many others, including police officers themselves.
This happened back when I was a kid. It was New Year's Eve, and I was staying up late because there was no school the next day. I think I was 12, and I lived with my parents and 2 siblings at the time. I remember that year was my first year that I was going to actually stay up until midnight to celebrate the new year. Every other year I had gone to bed well before midnight. So I was in the living room watching movies with my family, and the last movie of the night ended just before midnight. We turned the channel to one of those ones that shows the ball dropping in New York City. After that, my parents said that it was time for bed. My siblings and parents then went up to their bedrooms, and so did I. However, I wasn't really that tired. Like most kids, I loved playing video games, so I turned on my PlayStation, which I had in my bedroom. I remember that it got really warm in my room, and it was cold outside with it being the winter, so I went over and opened up the window a crack. I returned to my gaming chair and now heard the wind blowing from outside. But a short time later, after opening the window, I remember I heard a car door open and close. It sounded pretty close by, but I didn't pay it too much attention. However, we did live in a very quiet street, so I did notice it. Then I remember I heard footsteps entering the snow of our front yard. That's when I got curious and I walked over to my window. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor at the front side of the house, so I had a pretty good view. When I looked out of the window though, the person had just gone out of my sight. It sounded like whoever was there was going into our backyard for some reason, and I had no idea who would be at our house or why. I looked out to the street and saw the car. It was just a regular sedan, but I did not recognize it. I was curious, so I left my bedroom and went downstairs to look into the backyard. All the lights were off downstairs, so I was a little bit creeped out, but I quietly went to a back window, and when I looked, I saw this guy who I did not recognize standing around at the back end of the yard. He didn't really appear to be doing anything, but just kind of standing there. I also just barely saw him. The lighting was not very good, and after about a minute or so, the man turned and started walking back towards our house. When I saw this, I sprinted away from the window and went all the way back upstairs to my bedroom. I was freaked out and just hoped that the guy would get off of our property. But moments later, I heard a knock at the front door. Even though I was all the way upstairs, I heard it very clearly. The entire house was silent, with everyone having gone to bed. In that moment, I was really hoping that my brother, sister, or parents were awake and heard the knock, but apparently nobody did. After about 30 seconds of silence, there was another knock. I went over to my bedroom window and looked out. The man was standing there on the front step. I didn't dare go down and answer the door. I was considering waking my parents or siblings, but I kept a watch on the man instead. He stood around the door for a good 5 minutes at least. The longer he stood there, the creepier it seemed. Then he just walked away. He went back to his car and then drove off. It was very strange. Nothing else really strange like that happened again, and I never saw the guy after that. I told my parents about it the next day, and they were just as confused as I was. I still wonder about that sometimes. Who was that guy? Why did he go into our backyard? And why did he knock on the door? It's very weird.
It was mid-December. I was only 17 at the time, and every year just before Christmas week, my mom had to go on a 3-day business trip for work. Being an only child that lived just with my mom, I'd spend these days that she was gone home alone. Usually she'd leave just before winter break, so I'd be in school for most of the day. But this year she left the same day that our school let out for the holidays. I had the house to myself and wanted nothing more than to stay inside and chill all day. Our city was going through somewhat of a snowstorm, so I couldn't really leave the house anyway. I made some of the food that was left for me and found a new movie to watch. I had to pause it several times throughout the couple hours though, because the wind and snow would suddenly pick up and get really loud. It seemed like every time I looked outside, the weather was worse. Then, around 7 or 8, someone was walking up to the front door. I could hear their footsteps kicking against the snow, and they coughed several times as they slowly made their way up to the porch. I didn't have a clue who it could be. I paused everything and looked at the door, waiting for them to knock or ring the doorbell. As more time passed though, I could feel myself getting nervous, as something didn't feel right. I want to say I waited 3 or 4 minutes, not hearing anything, before I went up to the door and looked outside. Nobody was there. I could see the footsteps coming right up to the door, then going back the way they came. I was really confused how clearly I heard them walk up, but somehow I didn't hear them leave. Also, with the snowstorm outside, what reason could someone have to come up to my house? I think the only reason I could settle on was that the snow made it difficult to see, and they mistook my house for theirs. Maybe they realized once they got up to the porch and didn't want to alarm anyone, so they quietly left. It's probably a bit of a stretch, but I guess it was possible. After a while, I'd mostly stopped thinking about the situation and was more caught up worrying about the storm. The power cut out a few times, lasting for several minutes before it came back on. Because of that, I couldn't really watch TV or anything, so I just sat on the couch and scrolled on my phone. It was maybe around 11, when through the harsh wind, I heard a thump against the house. I initially ignored it, but only a few moments later, the power cut out again. Thinking the thump might have caused it, I got up. It sounded like it was from the side near the kitchen, so I turned my phone light on, then walked over and looked around. I thought it was probably just a coincidence that the power shut off right after I heard the thump, but I just wanted to be sure nothing happened. I didn't see anything, and I started to walk away. Hey! I jumped and looked at the back door, seeing a man standing against the other side. The back porch light wasn't on, so he was mostly covered by the dark. I could only see his face peering in at me. Hey kid, would you get the door for me? It's freezing out here, he said, putting his hand on the door and trying to open it. My head wasn't fully grasping the situation yet, and I kind of just stood there and stared at him. Kid, get the door, please. Something gave me a bad feeling. I knew better than to trust this guy, even though it was a blizzard outside. The man started coughing, and I started to back up, and the man's face instantly fell into a disturbing frown. Open the fucking door, he yelled, banging his fist against it several times. I ran back to the couch and got my phone. I then stood in the hallway and watched the man as I dialed 911. My phone was struggling to hold service and kept dropping the call, but after a few tries, I was able to get through long enough to ask for help. The man at the door continued to yell at me and hit the door, but eventually ran off. I'm assuming the snowstorm caused some trouble for the police, as they didn't make it until nearly 30 minutes after. I told them what I could, and I called my mom to let her know what happened. Nobody really knew what to think of it. He could have been stalking me and trying to guilt me into letting him in, or he could have actually been in need of help, although it's unlikely. I never saw him again after that night, though.
Yesterday, I celebrated my birthday. I invited my ex-girlfriend, Emma, because we're still really close friends. She took the train to get to me, which takes about 1.5 hours and requires changing trains twice. She left around midnight, so she should have been home at around 1:30 to 1:45 a.m. Shortly after 1 a.m., she texted me about a weird dude following her after striking up an upsetting conversation with her about, quote, whether she was gay. When she truthfully answered that no, she's just trans, hoping he would go away if she was friendly enough, he went on about why she was trans even though she knew it was satanic. He also told her that he'd already noticed her on the train that same morning, which just strikes me as especially creepy. She got off at a stop intending to wait for her subway home, but he got off with her and wouldn't leave her alone. The next subway to her place wouldn't come for another 25 minutes and the stop was completely deserted. She sent me multiple anxious voice messages until she eventually called me, borderline crying and panicking, saying that she had run away from the station and was now lost, with little idea where she was, even less than an idea of how to get home, and her phone was at 8% battery. She didn't have any money to call a cab either. She couldn't go back to the station because this guy was presumably still there, and he had followed her when she had tried to take the next train to the direction that she had come from in an attempt to get away from him. I advised her to call the police, which she did. They apparently came and took her statement and left again, leaving her there on the outskirts of a big city with still no idea how to get home. I told her to use Google Maps to try and get home and try to save some battery, but to update me periodically. She called me again a few minutes later, saying that she was 45 minutes on foot from home, but had thankfully managed to reach her mother, who was coming to pick her up from where she was, and I stayed on the line with Emma until her mom got there. And I'm so angry. Emma already struggles with severe anxiety and agoraphobia. The fact that she managed to make it to my birthday party is an achievement for her, and this is not going to help at all.
I was hosting a New Year's party at my house one year. I invited a few of my friends to come over to my apartment and hang out. It wasn't a big party or anything, just about 5 of us. My apartment is on the 2nd floor of the building, and even though it's just a 1-bedroom place, there's a decent amount of space there. So we were having a good time until somebody knocked on the door out of nowhere. Nobody else was supposed to be there, so we were all very confused. I was afraid at first that we were making too much noise and somebody was knocking to complain, but I didn't really think that was the case. We weren't being that loud, but I got up and walked over to the door. When I did, whoever had knocked was gone. There was nobody there. I opened the door and looked into the hallway, but there was still nothing. Then I went back inside and told my friends that there was no one there. We resumed talking to each other and having some snacks until whoever it was knocked on the door again. Now, I knew we were not being too loud, so I was confident that wasn't the problem, but I didn't know what else could be the cause of somebody knocking on my door multiple times. Once again, I got up and went over to the door, and once again, nobody was there. By now, I figured that it had to be a joke, or some prank that somebody was pulling. I didn't really know anyone in my building, so I wasn't sure why a prank like this would be pulled on me. But my friends and I got a laugh about it after figuring that's probably what it was. For maybe 30 minutes, there were no more knocks. Then, out of nowhere, we all heard it again. This time, I shot up and ran over to the door. I opened it and looked out. Just from the corner of my eye, I saw what looked like a man sprinting around the corner and quickly went out of sight. I didn't get a good look at him, but I actually went after him running to the corner that he had gone around. But when I got there, I just barely saw that he went into the stairwell. I wasn't going to chase him around the building, so I gave up and I went back. I returned to my friends and I told them how I had chased the guy. Once again, we all got a good laugh about it. My friends stayed for a few more hours and there were no more knocks during the rest of the time that they were there. After my friends had all gone, it was really late. I started getting ready for bed, but when I was doing so, I heard a knock on my door again. It seemed different now. There hadn't been a knock in hours, and it was much later, plus my friends weren't here, so it seemed creepy. I was surprised that the guy was still doing the prank, if that's what it was. Then there was another knock. I thought that it was maybe one of my friends at that point. Possibly someone forgot something at my place, because the prankster had always only knocked once, so this was unusual. So I walked over to the door. Before opening it, I looked through the peephole though. There was a man standing there who looked like the guy who kept knocking before. Of course, I didn't know for sure. I knew I could open the door and catch him, but he didn't seem to want to run away. He was standing there in a way that he wanted to go inside my apartment or something. He was not in a position to run. I thought that possibly he was going to apologize for pranking me earlier. Still, for some reason, I decided not to answer the door. After a little while, he walked away. Then I went to bed. The next morning after I woke up, I saw police cars parked outside the building from my window. I came to find out that they were there because a man who lived in the building had been attacked. A guy had knocked on his door and then attacked him when he answered it. Thankfully, the man was able to fight the guy off and he left without injuring him. When I heard that, I realized it was probably the same guy who had knocked on my door. I'm really glad that I didn't answer for him.
I had visited my family for the holidays and was driving back home. The trip in total was about 10 hours, which I split into 2 drives on the way up. But on the way back, I decided to power through it in one long drive. Around the halfway point, snow started coming down. It wasn't too much, so I wasn't worried about it. However, it got worse as I kept driving. Once I was 3 hours away from home, it was pouring down pretty heavily, and with the sun going down as well, it definitely was not ideal. There were almost no other cars out though, which is the only reason I decided to keep driving. The snow made it harder, but I was still on track to be home by the end of the night. It was just after the sun had fully set, and about 30 minutes out from the nearest town I just passed through, that I noticed a car on the road ahead of me. Their headlights were the only light on the road in the middle of the blanket of snow covering everything else. And as I got closer, it was clear that they were stuck, or at least not moving. Their car was sideways on the road, with their hazard lights flickering, and a man was standing out in the cold next to it. Obviously, with the snow and cold, I really didn't want to stop, but it seemed I didn't have a choice. His car was blocking most of the road off that was paved. I parked just behind him. The man immediately started waving at me and walked up to my window. My car slid and got stuck there. Can you help me push it out? He spoke slowly, like his English wasn't the best, but hoping I could get back on the road as soon as possible, I agreed to help him. The car didn't really look like it was in too much snow, so maybe just a little push might actually be enough. I threw my hat and gloves on, then got out. The wind hitting my face and snow instantly soaking me made me wonder why the guy even got out of his car and didn't just call for help. My face and hands were already getting numb, so I hurried to the back of his car and waited for him to get his gloves. It was too dark to see anything through the windows, and after a little bit of standing back there waiting, I looked around to see what was taking him so long. He was still leaning into the front seat, as if looking for his gloves, but I thought I heard him talking. A second later, he came back out and looked at me. Were you talking to me?" I asked. He looked concerned, but said he was just talking to himself. He smiled, then walked around to the back to help me push. I couldn't help but feel like something had changed though. His whole demeanor and the situation just felt different. Although I didn't hear what he said, it didn't really sound like he was talking to himself. But if someone else was in the car, then why was he out here alone and asking for my help? All these thoughts came rushing through my head, and I guess for a few seconds I was kind of spaced out. So much so that I didn't notice the man staring at me. His smile had dropped, and he had an eerie look in his eyes, like they were hollow and lifeless, completely opposite of what he looked like before. I didn't even hesitate, beginning to hurry back to my car. Just then, several doors from the car I was just behind opened, and 3 more men got out, rushing toward me. I sprinted into my driver's seat, and thank goodness I left my car on, because I put it straight in drive and rolled past them, almost hitting one on the way out. I was terrified of possibly getting stuck in the snowbank, as the path around their car was very thin, but thankfully I made it around and was able to get away. I put in a report with the police at the closest town, but there were never any updates as far as I know. I'm assuming the men weren't really stuck and probably left right after I did. I don't know what those men were up to. Of course, I have my guesses, but if I had stayed and didn't leave right when I did, who knows where I'd be.
My senior year of high school, I dated this guy, Tom. We dated for over a year, but the relationship was not good. We were always breaking up and getting back together again, fighting a lot. He threatened me often, and overall it was very toxic. His parents also had a very rocky relationship. His dad was an alcoholic and beat on his mom most nights. I even witnessed it when I spent the night there on rare occasions. It was pretty scary. Toward the end of his senior year, Tom cheated on me at his birthday party, and so we broke up again. 2 months later, we tried to get back together, but I realized that I just didn't like him anymore and called it quits for good. And that was 15 years ago, and was the last time that I saw him. Since then, I've heard that he became an alcoholic just like his dad, became very violent, and wound up in a mental hospital. I wasn't sure of the details on this, but I heard that he might actually be schizophrenic. 9 years ago, I met my now husband. We've been married for 4 years and have a 2-year-old and another one on the way. This is just for context. And maybe about a year ago, I got a random text message asking, "My name?" ? Now, I get work calls and texts on my personal phone, so I answered, "Yes?" ? And they wrote back, "How are you?" I should mention that I've had the same phone number that I've had since high school. And I didn't respond because I didn't know who it was, and at this point I figured it wasn't something related to work. A few minutes later, I got another text. "It's Tom. How are you?" When I tell you that I gasped, I responded, "I'm well. I hope you are too." And he wrote again, "What are you doing?" Again, I didn't respond, and then a minute later, "Do you ever think about us? Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we still lived together? Do you ever think about getting back together?" I sat in silence, rereading these messages, unsure of how to respond. Finally, I replied, "I'm sorry, Tom, but no. I'm married now and wish you the best, but I don't think that we should have any form of communication." And he responded, "Okay, sorry." Now, I thought this was weird, but whatever. Maybe the dude is lonely and just decided to reach out. Who knows? That was that. Now, last week, his mother showed up at my family business. I've worked here since high school in different roles, and she and his father have gotten a divorce, and she now has a boyfriend she seems to actually be happy with. We exchanged pleasantries, and then she asked, "Did you hear about Tom? He was in an institution." I said I'd heard that and that I was sorry to hear it, and she said, "He killed several animals, and that's why he ended up getting locked up." Again, I said that I was sorry to hear that, and then she said, "Yeah, but he's out now. He's been for a while. You know, you were always my favorite girlfriend he had. Do you ever think about him?" I wasn't sure what to say to this. I wanted to say, "Lady, I was in high school, no." Instead, I said, "No, I'm married now with a toddler. I don't have much time to think about anything." Trying to lighten the mood, I guess. And she then responds, "You know, he's not a bad guy. I don't see him that much anymore, but when I do, he still talks about you. He wonders what could have been. Would you ever be open to talking to him?" And that's when I shut things down. I told her it was great to see her, but that option was off the table now and forever. I said I had to get back to work. I walked away and hid in the back until she left. What in God's name, though? This high school relationship was years ago. I want no part of him or his family, and I'm just so sincerely hoping that he doesn't pop up at my place of work. I have no idea if he's still around the area, but I really, really hope that his institutionalized self isn't.
With New Year's coming up, I decided to write my own experience that occurred. It all started 3 years ago. It was New Year's Eve, and I was hanging out with some friends. We went to a bar in the city, and we're just hanging out. As you could imagine, most of the places were pretty busy, and at around midnight, the bar that I was in was especially crowded. My friends and I left the bar that we were at to go to another one. When we were walking down the sidewalk, I noticed on my phone that I had a new text. It was from a number that I did not know, and the text just said hi. Like I said, I didn't know who it was, so I did not text back. I stayed out with my friends for another hour or two. When I got home at about 2 in the morning, I got another text from the number again. It said, "Answer me," in all capitals with exclamation points as well. I texted back asking who it was, but I got no response for the rest of the night. The next morning, the number simply texted me a thumbs down. I was very confused, but figured that it must be a wrong number or something. I didn't really give it any more thought after that. The very next year, on New Year's Eve, I did not go out with friends but was hanging out at a friend's place. Once more, shortly after midnight, I got a text message. I didn't even remember the text from the previous year at all, except when I saw the new text that I got, the previous ones were there as well, and then I remembered. Once more, the text said hi at like 12:01. I responded quickly this time, asking who it was that was texting me. The number did not text me back for an hour. When it did, the person simply said, "I hate you." I was even more confused now. I couldn't think of anybody that would be texting me that. I also had all my contacts in my phone, so it wasn't somebody that I knew. Still, I brought it up with some friends, thinking that it might be somehow a joke. Nobody seemed to know anything about it though. After that, I didn't text the number back, and they didn't text me anything either. That brings us to last year. Once more, I had forgotten all about the number texting me either year. On New Year's last year, I was out with friends again. We went to some bars in the city again. I didn't really go on my phone much, but when I got home, I looked at it. At 12:01, there had been a text sent to me from the same number saying hi again. I texted back asking who it was and why they were texting me every New Year's. They never responded. I haven't heard from them since. But now New Year's is coming up again, and this would be the 4th year in a row that they text me if they do. For some reason, whoever this is remembers to text me every year right after 12 o'clock on New Year's. I can't imagine that it's some kind of a prank, but I have no idea who would be doing this or why. We'll see if it happens again this year.